Members, this is the appointed time and we have a quorum. So welcome all to the meeting of the panel on housing. We have this item today, which is briefing by the Secretary for Housing on the Chief Executive's 2022 policy address. So agenda item 1, information paper issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat has received an information paper as set out on the agenda. Let me now welcome the administration. Item 2, items for discussion at the next meeting. We have 2 papers, CB bracket 1730/2022 bracket 01. That is a list of outstanding items for discussion. And also bracket 02, which is a list of follow-up actions. The next regular meeting is scheduled 2:30 p.m. Monday on the 5th of December. The administration has proposed to discuss 2 items. 1, light public housing. 2, 3 public works projects under head 711. Project numbers B838CL, B871CL-1, and B778CL-2, which are about site formation infrastructure works for public housing developments at Fanling, Tsuen Wan, and Tai Po. Members, do we agree to discuss these 2 items at the next meeting? Are there any other suggestions? All right, so these 2 items will be discussed at the next meeting. Item number 3, briefing by the Secretary for Housing on the Chief Executive's 2022 policy address. Papers are set out in the agenda, and you should have this major housing initiatives in policy address just tabled in front of you. I see that members have pressed the buttons indicating their wish to speak, but meanwhile, let me first welcome the Secretary for Housing and her team to our meeting. She will be briefing members on the major housing initiatives. I'll give the floor to Secretary for Housing now. She will brief us on the major housing initiatives in the policy address with the aid of a PowerPoint presentation. First of all, I thank Chairman and members of the panel. I believe members have all read the policy address. There are many initiatives relating to housing. It shows the importance this government attaches to housing. We also have a basket of short, medium to long-term initiatives to resolve housing problem in Hong Kong. So with the help of a PowerPoint file, I'd like to brief members on the initiatives. Now, I think one highlight in the policy address is light public housing. Our target is to build around 30,000 light public housing or LPH units from 2023-24 to 2027-28, so as to provide better housing to the needy applicants in the short term. Next, we will substantially increase public housing supply. In the coming 10-year period from 2023-24 to 2030-33, based on the latest projection, the public housing demand is 301,000 units. The government has identified sufficient land for providing about 360,000 public units. So you will see that we have already provided a buffer. In terms of the coming 5 years, From 2023-24 to 27-28, that's the first 5-year period, we will be able to build 128,000 traditional public housing units. Together with the 30,000 LPH units I just referred to, we expect the total housing production in the coming 5-year period to go up to about 158,000 units, which is a substantial increase of about 50% as compared to the production of about 105,000 units in the previous 5-year period. As we enhance efficiency and the quantity of traditional public housing production as well as LPH, we propose to introduce a new index of composite waiting time for subsidized rental housing, that is CWT, so that by combining the average waiting time for public rental housing as well as LPH flats, will have a more comprehensive view of the waiting time as well as the effectiveness of the government's effort in improving the living environment of the public. And we will announce both the average waiting time for public rental housing as well as the CWT for LPH flats at the same time. Our target is to reduce the composite waiting time to about 4.5 years in 4 years' time. We also propose the PRH Advance Allocation Scheme. Before the Chief Executive assumed office, he already floated the idea of an advance allocation scheme, and we're grateful to the Housing Authority, the Housing Department, and other departments for taking stock of the available units for advance allocation. About 12,000 units will be completed earlier in the next 5 years, so that we can advance the intake of applicants by about 3 to 18 months. Whilst we strive to complete the construction of public rental housing earlier for early intake of applicants, we also advance the allocation. Well, occupation permit at the moment is issued 3 months before the intake. Now it will be issued 6 months before, so as to further allow advance allocation and intake of residents. We want to enhance the speed of construction, so we propose the adoption of the MIC approach, Modular Integrated Construction Approach. In the first 5-year period, we require all public housing projects to adopt the Design for Manufacture and Assembly approach, that is DFMA. And in suitable projects, we've also encouraged the adoption of MIC approach. In the second 5-year period, we require that no less than half of the projects to adopt the MIC approach, which is an enhanced version of construction, so that we build the modules in the assembly line before they are sent to the construction site. So that meanwhile we can enhance both the speed and quantity and quality of construction. As you can see about the design and build model, in the next 5 years, we require at least half of the public housing units to adopt the design and build contract. The purpose is to accelerate housing production. As you can see in the previous slide, in the past, there may be separate contracts awarded to different contractors for the design, foundation, and superstructure of the project. We propose to combine all of them in parallel so that we can carry out works on the interior of buildings as well as the exterior, so as to accelerate housing production. Number 7, we strengthen interdepartmental collaboration and streamline development procedures. I will lead an interdepartmental action group on public housing projects. In fact, The CDD, apart from the housing department, is also responsible for housing projects, because we also rely on other works departments such as sewage, drainage, water supply, etc. We need inspection efforts by the fire services department and the water and the WSD upon completion of works. All these departments are important, and we have a dedicated team from each of these departments joining the interdepartmental action group to enhance efficiency. We also want to leverage market forces through enhancing public-private partnership. We will introduce a new pilot scheme on private developer participation in subsidized housing development, and we strive to formulate a more detailed policy framework in the first quarter of next year, and we'll come back and brief members. Now, under this partnership approach, first of all, starting from the next financial year, 2023-24, 3 sites will be put up for tender in batches for developers to bid to build subsidized sale flats, which will be sold at the specified discount rate. For the second type, developers are encouraged to apply for rezoning of their privately owned land for developing subsidized sale flats to be sold at a discount rate. Apart from enhancing efficiency, quantity, and we also seek to enhance quality. Usually, we have public open space at the public housing sites, and the public open space is the area for community building. So the action group chaired by me will develop well-being design guidelines so that we can make improvements in terms of the nitty-gritty of the community facilities. We're going to select around 10 public rental housing estates for an overhaul, such as a facade beautification. We will add color to the housing blocks to improve the environment in general. We expect to conduct landscape improvement for around 20 public housing estates each year. Number 10. We've imposed a target, and that is we want to provide for a minimum size for newly built flats. The saleable area of all subsidized sale flats completed from the 2026-27 onwards will be no less than 26 square meters in general. As for newly built public rental housing, apart from 1-person and 2-person units, the internal floor area will be no less than the equivalent level, that is no less than 21 square meters. We understand that the public is also very concerned about land supply, so we will enhance the transparency of land and housing supply information. On the websites of the Development Bureau and the Housing Bureau, information is provided on land and housing supply in the coming 5 years, such as the quantity and the projects and in the year of completion. For the next 5-year period, we will provide the same information. Redevelopment of public housing estates. I understand that this issue is close to the heart of the public. We have not relaxed our effort, and at the moment we are planning for the redevelopment of 10 housing estates, and in the next cycle we will also select 1 more public housing estate to commence a redevelopment study. Housing ladder. The government continues to meet the public home ownership aspirations through the provision of subsidized sale flats, including the Green Form Subsidized Home Ownership Scheme, GSH, HOS, and starter homes. So we will continue to stabilize the supply of private housing.
Regarding the housing ladder, we will maintain a 70-30 ratio. PRH and GHS and other subsidized housing, we will maintain the 70-30 ratio. Public housing and private housing will also be maintained at this level. Moving on to private sector in the long-term housing strategy, the demand in the coming 10 years, it's estimated to be 129,000 units, and we will be trying to provide land for this target. Now, in the coming 5 years, we have private housing and land earmarked along with the subway lines, together with Urban Renewal Authority and other private development projects. The overall supply will exceed the long-term housing strategy. So I've also tabled pamphlets for members. So I'll conclude my presentation here, and I can answer any questions that you might have. So we do have panel members and non-panel members in the queue. We have Lau Guofen, Lei Jun, Reverend Kuhn, Tommy Cheung, Andrew Lam, Tony Che, Doreen Kong, Leung Man Gong, Judy Chan, Wendy Hong, Starry Lee, myself, Dr. David Lam, Lam So Wai, Dennis Leung, and Kenneth Leung. So if you haven't pressed the speak button, you can do so now. So I suggest we limit our time to 4 minutes. And when the Secretary responds, please also take note of the time limit. So we need to make good use of 4 minutes. Everybody's concerned about housing. So we do have a lot of non-panel members who said they would attend, and some of them are already present and have pressed the speak button. So we need to exercise good control on the speaking time. Mr. Lau Guofen, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. We welcome the Secretary. The policy address needs to be commended on the housing section. It is down to earth and practical. Regarding accountability, we see there's a cap on waiting time, the queuing time. There are new units being built, and there's a minimum size. There's a pledge on minimum size. The light public housing is also a measure that can address immediate needs of people who are living in subdivided units. They can see immediate relief. So it does provide a glimmer of hope for the public. And if light public housing, if that can meet the needs of people living in undesirable conditions, it is a glimmer of hope for them. So in the long run, we need to speed up the building and quantity. So in the PA, it's mentioned how we have more cooperation between government departments, and the Secretary is also chairing a cross-department group. So whether there is a minimum size cap or a queuing time pledge, it seems that we still need some statistics on building speed. Now, before 97, it took 37 months. In recent years, it takes some 60 months. So when the Secretary is chairing the cross-departmental task force, can we reduce the building time? Thank you for the question. Thank you for your encouragement. You've noted that the government is working hard to address the housing problem. As a matter of fact, in the long-term building infrastructure, we are sparing no efforts. And it is because of that, our housing department, they are focused on PRH, conventional PRH. So light public housing is now being headed by Architectural Services Department. So you can see we will involve our partners to address the issue. Now, the steering group that I'm responsible for, our work, it can be reflected in other KPIs. For example, in the coming 5 years, we have 128,000, and that is an increase over the past figure of 105,000. Now, we also have advanced allocation that can be pushed forward 3 to 18 months. Now, why are we able to achieve this? It's because we're able to generate some synergistic effects, and that is reflected in KPIs. So the steering group, I can explain a little bit more. For example, we are working with Fire Services Department. We have very good cooperation in the past. FSD, they might have to check off the units on their checklist one by one. They might have swimming pools that they need to be monitored, but now they have a dedicated team focusing on PRH. So they work at the very beginning on the design of fire escape, ingress, egress routes. So when the occupation permit is issued, the process can be made much more smoother. So that would be my brief response. I also see that there are a lot of outcomes that can be expected, but I would like a clear-cut description of building time. In the past, we know there was a certain time frame, and we need to have concrete timelines and to help the public monitor the building speed. Mr. Lei Zhankang. President Xi had mentioned in 1st of July that housing is a long-standing problem in Hong Kong, and we're happy to see that we have short, medium, and long-term measures to deal with it. The SAR government is dedicated to resolving this problem, so I wish you that you can achieve these results. So I have 3 questions. First is about abuse of PRH. We see a lot of people, including Dr. Choi, who address this issue. Some people sublet the units or even use it as a warehouse or storage. Some people might have assets on the mainland that are undisclosed. So aside from stepping up inspection, knocking on doors to see if people respond, well, will you be also using big data? Will you be examining immigration data? Will you be sharing data with the mainland counterparts to prevent these abuse issues so that we can release more housing for people who need the housing? Now, I support the government using modular construction, MIC. So housing department staff, can they support that? They might need more support in repair, maintenance, inspection, and so on. They need to use more technology. So I'm worried that they might not have sufficient resources. So I'd like, when you have so many projects, you need to maintain the quality of the housing so the tenants can live, have adequate and appropriate housing. Now, another issue is young people don't want to join the workforce, the construction industry. How can you attract people to this industry? Well, thank you, Mr. Lee. These are very good questions. I would like more time to discuss this, but I'll try to be brief. The abuse of PRH, I won't touch on individual cases. When we receive a complaint, each case is investigated thoroughly, and the relevant department, they have the relevant information. So I won't give you the details because if I disclose the details, I might be tipping off the perpetrators. So we have good intelligence, and we're all working on it, and we hope that the PRH resources can be used appropriately, and we should not allow people to abuse that. The next question about MIC. Thank you, Mr. Lee. As a matter of fact, in conventional PRH, we're speeding up quantity and quality, and the speed of building. So our colleagues are working on a lot of issues. The contracts need to be revised. So we do focus on staff levels. We also have urban renewal projects that might need more manpower. So we have to be careful regarding redevelopment. When we have one redevelopment project, we need to balance the different factors. So we're focused on conventional PRH. We have light public housing to help alleviate the problem. Now, regarding attracting young people to the industry, we shouldn't label them as construction site workers. We should call it construction technology. They can work in air-conditioned space. They can work with remote equipment. So by deploying more IT and delivering modules to the construction site, the workflow can be improved. Reverend Kuhn, thank you, Chairman. I have to thank the government because we have a lot of new policies targeting housing. But I do have a few questions. First of all, on light public housing, in the coming 5 years, there will be 30,000 units. But the previous government has made a pledge of 20,000 units. Now, we understand that we see there are different levels of rent. Transitional housing is 80% of market rate, and the LPH will be charging 90% of conventional PRH. So that means there will be a big price difference. The question I have is, how will you resolve these problems with the NGOs? There are also restraints on it. Transitional housing, they have to fulfill 80% conditions, and the other 20% are people living in subdivided units. Could we relax this? Because LPH, they need to wait 3 years. So a lot of people might not fulfill the 3-year requirement because there's a price difference. So can the government relax the condition for transitional housing? Because I'm afraid that the 20,000 units, when it's rented out, there might be some difficulty. Thank you, Reverend Kuhn. I'd like to talk about LPH and transitional housing. We have succeeded in earmarking 11.6 billion. We will make good use of this money, and the 20,000 transitional units will continue. So the LPH is something aside from the 20,000 units. We'll have 30,000 LPH. We have 128,000 PRH, 30,000 LPH, and another 20,000 transitional housing. So if you add it all up, it's 170,000. So we've expended a lot of effort to increase supply. Regarding rent, transitional housing, they have a set of rent. The tenants can apply for cash subsidies. So after you include the cash subsidy, it should be similar to LPH rent levels. The location of transitional housing and the nature are slightly different. So the people in the queue are given a choice. They might just wait currently, but if we have other better options for them, they can consider making an application. Now, regarding transitional housing, 20%, they can allocate, the NGOs can allocate the housing according to their client needs. But for LPH, it's slightly different. Our target is 3 years queue or above, they can make the application.
And the rent will be charged at 90% of that of PRH units in the same district. That is, the rate will be pegged to the design and size of the flats. So you see there is a variety of options for those in need. Any follow-up questions? All right, time's up. Next, Mr. Tommy Zhang, 4 minutes. Secretary, my party member asked you about abuse. In fact, there is a lot you can do, but you are trying not to tell us. You don't really have to tell us how you deal with it, but you have to do something about the abuse. I don't believe that the estate management is totally ignorant of the situation. So, in fact, you can issue a bounty or fee for the informant. Say your neighbor doesn't come home very often. He only comes home to pick up clothes, so on and so forth. So you can provide a reward for the informant so as to make available more PRH units for the needy. Because after all, we are wasting resources. There are so many people living in subdivided units and partitioned flats. Now, the policy address refers to enhancing speed and efficiency, and I'm delighted to see that this term of government has taken on board many suggestions from our party, the Liberal Party. But many proposals were floated before your time, before you even assumed this office. The former Chief Executive, Mr. C.Y. Leung, attended our Q&A session for the first time in the Council, and at the time, my fellow party member asked him, and it was 11 years ago, 2011, when the labor and construction costs were not as high, when we didn't have a manpower crunch. We already said this to the Chief Executive, C.Y. Leung. At the time, we didn't resume HOS production. We asked whether the government would consider labor importation for all public projects. Now, it's been 11 years, and you say that the MIC would help relieve manpower shortage. Still, there is a keen demand for manpower. And Chairman, at the PWSC, there will be a lot of funding applications and telling big sums of money for reclamation, for building roads and bridges. Now you have several hundred billion in your reserve. So that's not a lot of money. You should go back and discuss within the government whether you should import labor simply for the construction of public facilities, because this will help enhance speed as well as efficiency. Would you go back and discuss with the government? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tommy Zhang, for expressing his concern on public housing abuse and suggestions to tackle the problem. We will try different approaches, and security guards is, of course, one major source of information about enhancing manpower supply to enhance speed and efficiency. We focus production at the assembly line instead of at the construction site by adopting MIC. According to statistics, we could cut construction manpower by half on site by adopting MIC. So it's one way out. Still, we understand we still have many public works projects in line in the coming 5 years. We're going to produce 178,000 units, and in the next 5-year period, some 200,000 more. So that's a lot of work. We need to be mindful about the manpower supply. And I understand that the government is working with the Construction Industry Council in taking forward certain studies on the construction manpower. And we also have our own manpower projections, and we'll take a consolidated view on the arrangements for the construction industry. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I thank the Secretary for leading her team and showing resolve in tackling the issue. Now, in the long-term housing strategy report, close to 100,000 people are still living in subdivided units. The number has been on the rise. For subdivided units in particular, there are still some 90,000 tenants. And also about SDU tenants applying for public housing or PRH applicants. Most applicants live in shared units comprising 2 bedrooms, and that accounts for 42% of all applicants. If that represents the PRH applicants who are inadequately housed at the moment, that means 54,000 applicants are now on the PRH queue, and some 47,000 applicants, or 74,000 applicants are not on the PRH queue. So my question is, we have LPH and transitional housing providing some 50,000 units in total. That's for those not having joined the PRH queue. Is it really helpful? Because as I understand, transitional housing is mostly for those already queuing up for PRH. So policy-wise, is it effective? Assuming that you have increase in supply by providing LPH and transitional housing units, this will have an impact on the market. So should we also tap the market pulse? That is for those who have not applied for public rental housing. Will there be some tracking studies? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lam. Mr. Lam is very familiar with the inadequate housing situation. What he said is closely in line with the information we have. For inadequately housed people, in 2021, we commissioned a consultant to conduct a study, and about half of these tenants are eligible for public rental housing. So we're talking about some 50,000 plus tenants. As we work full steam toward expediting traditional public rental housing as well as light public housing, gradually they should be able to move away from undesirable living conditions and move up to proper housing. What we don't want to see is that these people should be eligible for public housing, and yet they are forced to pay very hefty rent to live in inadequate housing units. According to the SDU survey, half of these tenants are actually asset rich, and yet they choose to live in subdivided units because of other reasons, such as family reasons or proximity to the workplace, or for some other short-term reasons. That said, with increase in public housing production and the provision of light public housing, in the near future, the rental market, especially for SDUs, will change. And starting from next year, 2023-24, we will reach a peak in terms of supply. We will keep in view the STU rental market. In fact, the tenancy control was introduced in January this year, and we are collecting statistics. We seek to come back and brief members on the statistics later in 2023 and our way forward. Next, Mr. Tony Chair, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. The government in this term has reorganized, and we have a separate housing bureau. I do have expectations because Housing Bureau has two portfolios, public as well as private housing. But it seems that this paper refers to private housing in only one of the 30-plus paragraphs. Well, this is understandable because I see the focus is on waiting time for public housing. But the crux of the matter is shortage in private housing supply and the inaffordability. As a result, the PRH queue is getting longer. I wonder if this will create a culture in society when young people would just turn to public rental housing at the outset. You want to instill in our population a sense of well-being and happiness. I hope that you will not neglect the role private housing plays, because to some extent the middle class is not eligible for public housing. As for private housing, despite market corrections, the private housing prices are still not really affordable. Like President Xi said, we need to combine an efficient government with a capable market. Now, you mentioned the pilot scheme on public-private partnership. And last week at a seminar, Secretary, you explained this partnership scheme. Details will be announced next year. But I suppose a change will be made. Unlike the previous partnership scheme, this time there will be certain adjustments. And anyway, Chairman, I think that the focus of the scheme is on subsidized housing. A few days ago, we discussed the pilot land sharing scheme, and from newspapers, I understand the three projects will provide 21,000 units. 70% will be public housing, that's 15,000 units, in other words. I'd like to have the Secretary's view on how coordination can be taken forward, because by housing, we shouldn't just limit ourselves to public housing. Otherwise, you should rename your bureau to Public Housing Bureau. So my question is, Secretary, are you also paying attention to the difficulties in the private housing market? Secretary. Well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Member. And we now can act in a more focused manner, having split from the Transport and Housing Bureau. We have a separate portfolio for housing, and I have not forgotten private housing. According to our presentation and also according to long-term housing strategy, we also take into account private housing supply. The mix at the moment, or the split at the moment, is 70 to 30. So if we increase supply in general, the supply of private housing will increase correspondingly. And also for public housing, we have 70-30 mix. We have public rental housing and green form subsidized housing for the 70%, and the other subsidized outlets making up for the remaining 30%. Now, I'm confident in our young people. I don't believe that our young people will just stay put because of better public housing and the light public housing. Because I think it's common knowledge that private housing provides a rung on the housing ladder, and it's a way of keeping the assets. We also have starter home projects, And in next year's land sale program, starter home projects will be rolled out again. For the first-time home buyers, they are mostly quite young. 85% of them are below the age of 40. So for the younger generation, I do hope you have aspirations for career ownership so that you can move up the housing ladder.
Doreen Kong. First of all, I have to thank the Secretary for her efforts. She's dedicated to solving the housing problem. I have some questions on public housing. Now, your forecast is that we're going to have more information for analysis. Now, I just visited the government website, and there are some forecasts and even estate names, but it's only a 5-year forecast. So could the Secretary provide more information for the public, including the work progress in each district, the work progress, the number of units, and the completion date, and so on, so the public can be aware what kind of units are available in which districts, and the public can monitor the government's building progress. Second, we now have family applicants that are given priority. We have a lot of singletons. Does the government have any policy to help them? Now, I'm also happy to see that you'll be building government housing, public housing, and light public housing. So are you confident that we have sufficient funds to build so much housing in such a short time? And have you considered in the coming 5 years, we have people living in inadequate housing, aside from those already in the public housing queue. Do you have any estimate when these people living in inadequate housing can be relocated to public housing? Thank you, Ms. Kong. You have visited our website. The information there is very diverse. We have different districts, the type of housing, whether it's public housing, green GHS, HOS, and so on, and also forecast units and completion date. We have all this information available. I think it can provide. It can help tenants choose. Well, I think we do have a lot of useful information for reference. Now, regarding the waiting list, we have so many people in the queue. I think you'll understand that. So families or elderly or non-elderly singletons, we all feel that families and elderly need to be given a higher priority. But as the supply increases, we have transitional housing, LPH, there are more choices for singletons. We have some one-person units in transitional housing. On financial resources, I have to thank Housing Authority, Housing Department. They have been keeping an eye on the funds. We do have income. We have HOS, and also GHS. But we do have expenditure in repair and maintenance that we need to take care of. So we have to be very careful when we increase rent. So we have to take into account all kinds of factors. For example, during COVID, a lot of tenants were waived rent or rent was postponed. All this affects income, so we need to strike a balance. The other question was about inadequate housing. it's hard to come up with a ratio. Now, according to our previous stance, our long-term supply is sufficient for people in the queue. The long-term housing strategy, as Mr. Lam said, if some people in the queue, they weren't Hong Kong residents, in the 7th year they become Hong Kong residents, so they can be taken care of. So as the supply increases, the people who need to live in public housing, they can be taken care of. Mr. Leung Man Gong, the housing policy in the PA, I commend the speeding up of building quality and quantity. Well, I would like to share with you that after the PA was issued, I interviewed tenants in subdivided housing, and their response was that they're very happy that their child doesn't have to do homework on the bed. So they have expectations and they have questions, and we've also heard members ask the related questions. So if you look at the paper, there will be some allocation contracts and other requirements. But regarding community support, will the NGOs be given a free rein? And I want to ask the question about rent. It's 90% of conventional PRH. It's between 2,700 and if we have $570, that's the housing available would only be in Yulong Tin Soi Wai. So could you tell us what locations you have in mind, and what difficulties you encounter, how to resolve these issues such as transport? The comprehensive waiting time includes conventional PRH waiting time. So there is a concern that the government won't live up to its pledge. So I want to ask his secretary, will you still have a 3-year target as your ultimate goal? So after LPH, I want to talk about enhancing design and happiness. So aside from improving hardware, your policy software needs to be improved, such as enhancing family harmony, work-life balance, and so on. Will there be any room to enhance hardware and also allow families living there to enjoy these new facilities? A lot of questions were asked. I'll have to respond briefly. In fact, LPH drastically improves housing needs, whether it is the size of the unit or rent levels. In the urban area, it's $40 per square foot, and now we're only charging 1/5, $8, and the area is increased on the per capita in subdivided units is 50 feet per person, and for LPH it's 70 feet per person or more. So the introduction of LPH can provide immediate choice. Now regarding location, we are aware short-term land use, for short-term use, it's not easy to identify such plots. So we have only been able to find short-term land use. We have Mr. Lam from Development Bureau. He's helped us to identify better locations, but it's inevitable that we'll have more land in new territories, but we're still trying to identify Hong Kong Island, urban area, if the location is in the downtown area, we ask ASD to build taller and we can have more units available, but it will take a longer time. So we need to balance different factors. I also want to answer the 3-year queue question. That is still the government's target. In the past, we had the 3-year pledge. That is something that we're working hard to achieve. But there are many factors at play. How long your queue is. We have to look at the average number of applicants, the allocation of housing. There might be more supply in new territories. But let's say some people want to live on Hong Kong Island. They only queue in the Hong Kong Island queue. And it seems like they have a long queue time. But that doesn't match the overall statistics. So we're still trying to achieve the 3-year target. Thank you, Sharon. Judy Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I see that a lot of effort has been expended. We want to build more, build faster, build better quality. So the public have a lot of expectations. So if you don't want to disappoint people, especially those living in subdivided units, the PA says that in the first 5-year period, they need to use MIC, and in the second 5-year, not less than half have to be used. They have to use the MIC modular construction method. So if MIC technology is deployed in conventional PRH, how much time and money can you save? If you can save a lot of time and money, then why is it only deployed in the second 5-year period? Are there some difficulties or sites that cannot use this method? Because on the mainland, MIC technology is quite mature. Second question about BIM. In the policy address, it touches upon the use of BIM. Our KPIs did not mention when PRH will deploy BIM technology. It just says that in 2024 you'll deploy software for architectural drawings. So I'd like Secretary to elaborate a bit more. Thank you. Why did we suggest half of the projects, why MIC is deployed in the second 5-year? It's because in the first 5 years, the tenders, we have to monitor their progress. We have to prepare which projects can deploy MIC. They have to do so at the design stage, so the focus would be in the second 5-year period. Can we save time and money? Ultimately, we hope that the more modules that can be completed at the factory and then sent to the construction site, we can save some time. But the concrete forms in MIC, more and more contractors are getting familiar with it. So we have to consider the construction sites. Large sites might be able to save more time, and small sites might save less time. MIC also works with design and build contracts. So when you deploy both, we see that the savings might be 4 months. But for larger projects, we might even achieve 6 months or more savings. It depends on the size of the site. And for design and build contracts, we'd like contractors to compete. Whoever can complete it quicker will score more points and be awarded the contract. Now, for BIM, I would like to say,
同時咧，
Well, actually, the housing department started using BIM in 2006. So the housing department is actually the pioneer of BIM. For the approval of building plans, the housing department also internally adopts BIM as well. Now, Ms. Chan refers to the application of BIM in private housing projects. Again, a phased approach will have to be taken. Now, I don't know if you're looking at the buildings department. It's 2024 for BIM to be adopted. But for housing department, actually, it has been adopted since 2006. Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, the Chief Executive, has provided KPIs in the policy address. Resources will be pooled to expedite housing production to help SDU tenants improve their living condition. But indeed, there are grassroots in society that are not eligible for public housing and cannot afford private housing either. And there are many such young people. When you focus your resources on public housing, these people are left helpless. In the past few years, the HOS production was fewer than 5,500 units, but every year the government receives 240,000 applications. It's oversubscribed by more than 5 times. And according to the long-term housing strategy for public housing, according to the meeting paper, the annual supply will be 74,000. But even so, it will be a far cry from the 240,000 applications we receive every year. The upward mobility opportunities are limited for these young people. Many young people now request not to be promoted and not to get a pay rise, simply for the reason of getting public housing. And for better off public housing tenants, they cannot afford they cannot get the HOS units either. So everything is slowed down. Secretary, will you consider the housing or home ownership needs for the sandwiched class and set a similar KPI? And next, about PRH redevelopment projects. Decanting is required, and they will take up certain public housing resources as well. And will this cause a delay for SDU tenants to be rehoused? Secretary, thank you, Dr. Hong. Your question is in the same vein as the question on housing ladder asked earlier by another member. I want to emphasize that the public-private housing split is 70-30. In public housing, we have a similar 70-30 split. In the past, the split was 60-40. Fewer public housing, more private housing. But now with the PRH queue getting longer, there is a consensus in society that we must increase public housing supply, hence the change of the split to 70-30. And according to the long-term housing strategy report, we are recommended to change the split to 70-30. Meanwhile, we are mindful about home ownership aspirations. We have a very aggressive discount rate for subsidized sell-flat. For example, for green form subsidized housing, it's there is a discount, and for HOS 51%, and in other different settings, some 70%, 80% of the market rate. So we have different rungs on the ladder. Will you provide a KPI for the housing production in the subsidized housing sector? Well, we mentioned in the policy address that more starter home projects will be rolled out in the next financial year, and suitable projects will be put forward in the next land sale program. On redevelopment projects, I agree with Dr. Hong that we are quite prudent about these projects. We already have 10 projects in the pipeline, and in the past 10 years, we completed 13 redevelopment projects. In order to take forward a redevelopment project, we need to, first of all, reserve certain units for decanting. So these units will be held up and not available for allocation. And it poses a great burden on the waiting time as well as the available manpower within the department. So we need to strike a balance here. Next, Ms. Dari Lee, 4 minutes. Chairman, about the Chief Executive's policy address and the housing initiatives, I agree that we should enhance the speed and efficiency of construction. We should provide light public housing, and we should roll out the composite waiting time for public housing. We should adopt MIC, DFMA in the construction of public housing. I agree with all these initiatives so as to gradually tackle the deep-seated conflict in society. Still, I'd like to pass a number of comments on subdivided units. The Chief Executive has not given any undertaking in his policy address to phase out subdivided units. We are an affluent society, and subdivided units are inadequate households. It's not suitable for living. So you should take it step by step in the coming 5 years, provide better housing for subdivided units or subdivided unit tenants. And yet I don't see a timetable so that people understand you have the resolve to tackle the problem. Secretary, we have a subcommittee on SDUs, and we believe this target can be achieved. In 10 to 15 years' time, you do have the condition to phase out inadequate SDUs. Public rental housing, next point, is for grassroots, is subject to means test. As for starter homes, subsidized housing units for younger people, I don't see a substantial increase in supply. So can you explain a bit more? Are you going to update your undertaking to reassure these two groups of applicants? Secretary, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Lee, about bidding SDUs farewell. As I explained before, in the next 10 years, we have adequate supply, and in the short term, we're going to introduce light public housing as well as transitional housing in order to tackle the issue of SDUs. So in the coming 10 years, my take is that inadequate SDUs charging exorbitant rent will be phased out. They will no longer exist. Now, how about you go back and give it a thought and give us an undertaking for the inadequate SDUs? Can you provide us with a timetable and a roadmap for phasing them out? Yes, we'll go back and give it a thought. About HOS starter homes, the first rung on the housing ladder or the home ownership ladder, I want to emphasize that apart from the land available, in which we have a 70-30 split, we also leverage on the private market forces. We have the partnership scheme that is for privately owned land by developers. We encourage them to make available such lots for the provision of subsidized sale flats, and we will provide a discounted land premium to these developers. Land sharing pilot scheme is another initiative. For privately owned land, 70% can be used for public housing. And by public housing, we will also further consider the proper mix and whether to provide subsidized or sale flats or rental housing. Next, my turn. The government has a rolling 10-year housing production plan, and yet over the years I find it quite disappointing that the government has not been able to tackle this issue. Despite years of implementing this rolling program, very often the housing production won't be increased until the latter part of the 10-year period. Now the Secretary has come up with ways in order to achieve about 50% of the public housing target in the second half-year period, or the first half-year period, or the first 5-year period. And this short-term initiative is called Light Public Housing. I think this is worthy of our support. And the initiative has also won a lot of acclaim after it's been announced in the policy address. Now my question is this. You are going to adopt different methods, design and build new construction approaches such as the MIC, DFMA, so on and so forth. Of course, these are all good deeds. However, there is one question. MIC is akin to stacking containers. In theory, more space will be required. So that means if you do the math, fewer units will be provided. It's easy to solve this problem, however. Perhaps you can tweak the technical aspect to make sure they don't take up as much space. The other method is to increase plot ratio. In such circumstances, since we are in severe shortage of land, since we are facing so many difficulties in taking forward our housing production, the government should relax the plot ratio restrictions. Now, on the well-being design, I want to talk about redeveloping older estates. In some areas, you have new public housing estates and old ones in the same neighborhood. And those living in older units are very aggrieved. They have concrete spalling and other problems inside. So if possible, you should at least construct 1 or 2 housing blocks for decanting. And then you can speed up the redevelopment of older public housing estates which do not maximize the use of land. These are points I'd like to follow up on. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for appreciating the new light public housing initiative, which should help us solve the problem of late completion of housing in the 10-year period. Say for light public housing, we may receive tender proposals using concrete, but say if steel is proposed, we do specify the methodology and the construction. It's not conversion from containers. Now, because of the prefabricated components, the floor slabs may be thicker than traditional public housing. And in fact, recently I've come across newer ways of building thinner walls. And anyway, we follow the Buildings Department's guidelines. We provide a 10% exemption. And as far as the building height is concerned, the same applies. The same exemption applies, in other words. For old public housing estates, we continue to conduct site investigation to keep in view the condition of existing public housing estates. There shouldn't be any danger or hygiene problems. Of course, if you come across such cases, please give the housing department information so that they can follow up on these cases. I already explained the redevelopment of public housing estates, the selection criteria, and other technical and other considerations. Basically, we consider whether we have a decanting space near the public housing estate in question. Very often, existing tenants are reluctant to be removed and decanted to another district, so that depends on the site in question. We need to strike a careful balance.
Dr. David Lam, I'd like Deputy Chairman to chair the meeting. I have a question about statistics. 4.5 years comprehensive waiting time, that is the median. And then I want to ask, is there any goal how long it will take 90% of people to be settled in PRH? And our social housing is not just housing, it's also a living community. Now, in light of an aging population, how can we age in place? So I want to ask, has the government considered gerontology technology for early onset dementia, or those who have mobility issues? How can you help them go home? The government is setting aside 5% of space for community rehabilitation, but have you done calculations on how much space we need for an aging population, for daycare centers, and how can we integrate the community healthcare services? Now, that not only touches on housing, it's also health and welfare, medical care. So has the government coordinated the different departments to come up with a design that is suitable for aging in place? Thank you, Mr. Lam. A simple answer, 4.5 is average time. Every quarter we announce the queue time, and it is an average time. It's not a minimum or maximum. Now, regarding aging in place, housing authority, when necessary, the tenants can apply to have handrails installed or special equipment. People who need wheelchairs, they can have special arrangement. Now, previously I had a Facebook clip explaining or elaborating these facilities. Now, our happiness design guideline, I'd like to focus on some estates where there are more elderly. The community space can allow them to exercise and socialize. Just talking and walking a bit more can keep them healthy, and we want to attract the elderly to exercise a bit more outside their homes. So can we explore the use of technology? Well, we have an open mind. When we draft the guidelines, we can communicate with the consultant, and we can explore these technologies. The 5% community facilities or healthcare facilities are already in place. Now, I have a steering group that includes SWD and health department. If you have any special requests, they can discuss in that group. Do we have a KPI when 90% of the people in queue can be settled in PRH? So 4.5 years is an average. Our KPI is within 4 years. Next, Ms. Lam So White. The PA has looked into the housing issue They want to build more, build better quality, and build quicker. So we will also have 20,000 transitional housing units next year that can help a lot of grassroots, especially those living in subdivided units. But during the development of transitional housing, the government should also consider community aspects. For example, Mawansan Lot Wasale, transitional housing, it started in September this year. And there's a forecast of 436 units, and it will be completed in the third quarter next year. But I have recently received a lot of feedback from residents. The transitional housing site is adjacent to Zhenyun Estate. It's only 3 meters away, but the design, the refuse collection point, the sewage, it's only 3 meters away. So they are concerned that there's odor and noise. It would affect the elderly and children. It might even affect health. And some tenants, they have already shot a lot of footage highlighting the dust in the area. So this project just started, and will you accommodate the community's views? Will the government departments and the contractor, Tonghua General Hospital, will they communicate with the residents? We'll also have a lot of transitional housing in Zhengguanou, Mawansan. So in the design, can you avoid repeating these controversial issues? These facilities, can they be relocated away from the tenants? Can you balance the needs of the community such that transitional housing tenants can integrate smoothly into the community? The public living there can feel their happiness level increase. Thank you, Ms. Lam. I'm aware that everybody is aware that some people need to live in inadequate housing. So this term of government has put forward a lot of policies to help them, but each measure, it needs the whole society's efforts, because when these projects are in place, we need to understand that we're trying to help people. I have taken note of the Mawansan project. You have to. I am aware there is an issue with the septic tanks. This is not a traditional septic tank. It's deploying new technology. So we can communicate after this meeting. My colleagues can. It's a sewer treatment plant. Some transitional housing projects are using this technology. We can provide more information. You don't need to worry so much. There might be dust during the construction stage. So we will remind Donghua General Hospital and their contractors. They need to spray more water and take care of the dust problem. So our colleagues can communicate with Donghua General Hospital and the contractor. I am aware they're already working on it. Mr. Dennis Leung. Now, just now, we heard about imported labor, and I need to respond to that because I represent the labor sector. The contractor subcontracts level, it is subcontracted 7 layers deep, and ultimately the wages are very low, and illegal workers are employed. So nobody wants to take on low-paying jobs. So, Secretary, I hope you can review the subcontracting system. The subcontracting layers go too deep, and wages are suppressed, and ultimately, importing labor is not the solution. I also want to talk about the LPH. I'm very happy that the Secretary has a new initiative. We have it dealt by ASD rather than Building Department. This is a new initiative, and it also uh, breaks up old monopolies. If you're successful, you can increase the unit size. You can bring down rents. But the thing is, you're only seeking funding in the first quarter next year. When will we see the first unit be available? You say that there are 30,000 units being rolled out in 2024, 26, 27. So does that mean that there's 6,000 units per year? When will we get the first unit? The second question is about young people, uh, home purchase aspirations, public-private cooperation. Well, do you have any middle-class rental schemes? Or do we have units for rent only for those who are not eligible for PRH? And they are eligible for HOS or GSH, so we can reduce the people in the queue for PRH. A lot of people cannot afford private housing. They take lower paying jobs. But if you are able to implement my suggestions, you might be able to reduce the queue in PRH. And the last question is, you talked about enhancing happiness feelings. So we have some public estates that have sold off their shopping malls and parking space to Link REIT. So they now need Link REIT's participation and also ICU participation. So will Housing Department manage the estates only? Could you elaborate? Thank you for the questions. Let me answer the LPH question first. You understand that the conventional PRH workload is very heavy. In 10 years' time, we need to provide 301,000 units. We have to do MIC, design, manufacture, assemble. So buildings department is already overworked. So that's why we have engaged ASD. They have experience with quarantine units and so on. I'd like members to understand that since 1st of July, since our appointment till now, it's been 4 months, and we pledged by beginning of next year that in 6 months we can come back for funding application. You'll have to understand that we're working at full speed already, and it's an uphill battle. Once we get the funding, we can start the tender, and by 2023-24 we can break ground, and our target is to have 1,000 units in the first phase. Between 25-26 we'll see the peak of works. We'll see more completion. At the same time, transitional housing is also entering its peak phase. We already have 5,400 units, and by the end of this year we'll have another 1,600. That is a total of 7,000. Next year we'll have some 10,000 for tender. So we'll be breaking ground for new projects. And by 2023-24, transitional housing will be available. So when you add it all up, it will enhance the supply substantially. Now, regarding the middle class rental schemes, now I wouldn't want people who I wouldn't want people to sacrifice their career in order to stay in the PRHQ. They should have a longer term perspective.
我知道
But we understand the young people's concern, and I understand that the government has youth hostel program under the Home and Youth Affairs Bureau at a discounted rate. Young people can live in the hostels and save up. And we also have a pilot scheme. By pilot scheme, we will be using our existing public housing stock, and depending on the outcome of the pilot, we will also further extend the initiative to other projects. Next, Mr. Kenneth Lau. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to share this with the Secretary. Now, recently I've been conducting consultation on mapping out a blueprint for youth work in Hong Kong, and home ownership is one major concern for the public, but not so much for the young people, because home ownership seems a very, very far away dream for them. They don't feel they have a choice. They don't have hope. They don't feel that they are taken care of by the government. Like many members already said, they may need to resort to very extreme means in order to be eligible for the public housing queue. They might work less and get paid less just for the sake of it. So Secretary just now mentioned the Home and Youth Affairs Bureau taking forward a youth hostel scheme. I know that the scheme could relieve the housing issue a bit, but the philosophy behind is for young people to be engaged socially and to save up whilst living in a youth hostel. I hope you continue to provide more support, and when the youth development blueprint is rolled out at the end of this year, more support can be provided to our young people to climb on the home ownership or at least a housing ladder. Now, I know that you're going to take forward further starter home projects, but it's still costly for first-time buyers, close to $1 million. So we consider more innovative mortgage plans for the starter home projects, say a progressive rate mortgage plan, or co-ownership of the property between the government and the young buyer, so that in the future young people can redeem the title. And about LPH, I understand the LPH doesn't come with major facilities such as a hospital. What about open space or pleasure grounds for young people? Do you have at least these community facilities? Because apart from improving housing, we also need to create a healthy community. So one comment, two questions for the Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. We note the comment. We'll continue to keep in view the arrangements relating to starter home projects. Now, are there other ways to take forward the start home project, such as a progressive rate mortgage plan, we will consider member suggestion. About facilities for light public housing. By light, we mean some light community facilities. For larger housing estates, they come with, say, kindergartens and shopping malls, so on and so forth. For light public housing, we have similar facilities on the ground floor of the blocks. The operator will be providing support to residents. There should be space for parent-child activities or for children to do their homework together. And that's part of community building. Sorry, Chairman, I'd like to respond to Mr. Lam's question just now about outsourcing. I'm sorry. Please allow members who have not spoken to ask the questions first. You can answer follow-up questions when you have time. Mr. Louis Long. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, you just now answered a number of members' questions on redeveloping older housing estates. I'd like to follow up on the same issue. My question is on the aging of public housing estates. According to the housing authorities data, as of today, about 4% of housing estates are above 50 years of age. 5 years down the road, assuming that no redevelopment takes place, the percentage will go up to 16%. Come another 5 years, by 2032, the percentage will be 20%. I use the age of 50 as the line to be drawn because, according to our industry, usually the lifespan of reinforced steel bars would be 50 years. Now you consider a number of factors, and according to your paper, you're going to select one more public housing estate within this year for redevelopment study. Now, in face of aging public housing stock, will the Secretary act more proactively and select more than one existing public housing estate? Of course, you have a maintenance strategy, but I don't think this is value for money. I'd like to have your view on the matter. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Long, for the questions. Your point is valid. When we consider redeveloping housing estates, we first consider the age of the estate, the condition, and whether it's costly to maintain such an aged housing estate. Just like human beings, a person's health doesn't only depend on his age. And the Housing Authority has a very good plan to review the condition of public housing estates on a regular basis. Investigation would be carried out. They would conduct site inspections and collect samples. They also have a comprehensive maintenance scheme, a total maintenance scheme. They checked, say, drainage and pipes, and they conduct inspections in a 5-year cycle. For structural safety, they have an inspection program. That's a 10-year cycle. Now, as I answered other members' questions, I already explained that the Housing Department is taking forward 10 redevelopment projects. 6 are old public housing estates and 4 are old factory estates. We have major redevelopment projects such as Wafu Estate. We're also developing land for new blocks. We need to strike a balance between resources and the available manpower and the units available for reallocation. We'll carefully consider the options. Mr. Vincent Chang. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I thank the government for rolling out a lot of housing initiatives in the policy address, including increasing public housing supply and laying down indicators. I support the initiatives. I'd like to make 2 points about LPH, as mentioned by many other members. In the past few years, I took part in transitional housing projects as well. I hope the Bureau would pay attention to the link between the two. You are going to produce 20,000 units, and these two. And what about the living condition of those living in TH units and its correlation with LPH? We need to consider carefully. We need to thank these NGOs running transitional housing. They've made a lot of efforts, overcoming a lot of obstacles, and they still have a lot of hurdles to go through. Secretary, you should continue to provide the best support for them, especially you have some 30,000 units coming on stream. Finally, I hope all units would be optimally used. So I hope you'll continue to follow up on the projects. Next, about subdivided units, as mentioned by Ms. Sari Lee, we should bid SDUs farewell, and especially we should phase out SDUs that are really inadequate. The living condition is really appalling. You now have a proper basis, since you're going to increase housing supply for units with imminent danger, units that are really inadequate. They should be phased out through a licensing regime or otherwise. You should deter those operating substandard and inadequate SDUs from going further. And some say that with 20,000 LPH units, SDUs will gradually be phased out. But is it true? Now, say if you have 50,000 units in total, combining LPH and TH, does it mean that the 50,000 SDU units will be phased out in the coming 5 years? I can't say for sure. So I'd like to have the Secretary's take, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chang, for the 2 questions. Let me take his first question about transitional housing. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the NGOs operating transitional housing projects. They are really dedicated to the service. The difference between LPH and TH is the time frame. For TH, the government provides funding. NGOs then apply for funding, and then they engage their own consultants and engineers. At the initial stage, I've heard that they do come across a lot of difficulties. NGOs are usually service-oriented, but their roles are switched as they become clients and they have to engage consultants. The time frame is longer. For LPH, it's government-led. That means the government takes the initiative by engaging experienced works teams, and the government also takes charge of the management of the projects, applies for funding, issues tender, so on and so forth. So we're able to compress at least the initial stage of the construction timetable. In fact, for transitional housing, the actual construction phase is not too long, but we do hope to enhance efficiency at the initial stage of its production. For subdivided units, we have been discussing the issue. I also personally visited some appalling SDUs. We are an advanced society. I don't think anyone would see the existence of these SDUs, and we're enlisting the help of other departments such as the BD and the FSD. They are reviewing the relevant ordinances and the WSD as well, and they have dispatched teams to the SDUs for installing separate water meters and checking for abuse. The tenancy control has just come into force since January this year, and it's been several months. And we have teams set up under the dedicated departments, and the R&VD has just told me that they have hired a retired senior police officer to help out with collecting evidence and tackling the issue of or imposing tenancy control of SDUs in a more efficient manner. We'll continue to coordinate with other government departments.
Now I see that we still have some time, and there are some members with follow-up questions. So we'll exercise 3-minute time control. So let's start with Mr. Tony Shea. I have to thank the Secretary for pointing out that the private sector in the housing ladder, they play a role, and the government policy is not just to purchase PRH, because we should not rely on the government's subsidies. We should not rely solely on the government subsidies. Well, in today's documents, it seems that you have a lot of emphasis on public housing. Now, many years ago, almost 8 years ago, I talked about per capita living space goals. The paper has set a cap on PRH minimum size, and also public housing for sale, but there's not much description on the private sector. We don't have a timetable. The paper just mentions 26, 27. We have a KPI, but not for private housing. Second, for PRH, the rent and income, the rent levels are about 10-11%, but for private sector, sometimes it can go up to 50% of family income. So why doesn't the government set some KPIs for this, that we can balance the demand and supply? The government is a big land supplier, so can they play a more significant role in affecting price stability? Because housing can be unaffordable even for the middle class or professional classes. We need to make good use of the market. We should not rely solely on government subsidies. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Mr. Chair. When we formulate government policy, we look at the public and private sector. Increasing land supply, even though we have a ratio of 70-30, when land supply goes up, the private sector supply also goes up. The government will not neglect the private sector. And as in the past, we feel that 70-30 is a good proportion, and public housing has been a sore point for many years. So we will be keeping an eye on things regarding the area cap. Now, our subsidized housing will have a size cap in 26-27. It's because our work's already starting, and we will be able to implement these caps in 26-27. So I'm aware that 26 meters will be a minimum area, and the so-called nano flats, they cannot get smaller than that. The demand and supply in the private sector, we've had good management measures, such as the stamp duty. We can manage the demand through these measures. So that's why we see in this policy address the relaxation of stamp duties have been laser focused. We see that prices are still very high in the private sector. The sometimes rent or mortgage payment can go up to 50% of family income. So we feel our measures are effective and needed. Well, demand management occurs because there is insufficient supply. The answer lies in supply. I hope you don't neglect that. Dr. Wendy Hong, I'd like to ask the Secretary about redevelopment. According to past experience, if you relocate 1,000 tenants and when they return, it becomes 1,300, 1,500 units because the children grow up and they get married, and let's say we have a singleton elderly, and when they return, they come back with a caregiver. So when the estate is redeveloped, the floor space cannot meet the old tenants' demands. And for the white form secondary market, for the premiums that have not been paid, now the guarantee period is 30 years, but bank mortgages are also 30 years. So if you look at HOS, the majority of them were built in the 90s and the 2000s, but their buildings age getting close to 30 years, the guarantee period. So when you purchase these units, you have to take out a very short mortgage, and a lot of people cannot afford them. So will the government relax the 30-year guarantee period, and will the government explore with banks the mortgage period so that people can take out a longer mortgage and a lower down payment? But thank you, Ms. Hong, Dr. Hong. Let me talk about the guarantee period first and redevelopment units. The permanent secretary is very familiar with that, and he could elaborate. So we'll have a permanent secretary elaborate later. Now, whether the 30-year period can be extended, it's a risk issue. Housing authority, if they need to undertake, let's say, when somebody forfeits their mortgage, what kind of pressure it will bring to housing authority. Just now we also heard questions about housing authority has a lot of units to build, and they have a lot of management and administrative expenses. So we have to manage the overall finances very carefully. Now, regarding adding units to redevelop units, I'll have Ms. Wong elaborate. Now, Dr. Hong is correct. When there is a redevelopment, we see people moving out of their original units, and the rate is typically 1.2. So when we choose estates for redevelopment, we have to be very careful. Well, do we have sufficient resources? Will it affect people in the queue, because as Dr. Hong said, if I focus on the redevelopment projects, that takes away from other projects. So the estate, is maintenance and repair costly, and is it better to redevelop? All these factors have to be considered. Mr. Dennis Leung, I'd like to clarify. I am Dennis Leung. My name was typed wrong, and I also read it out wrong. So, regarding redevelopment and transitional housing, interim housing, we see the problem with redevelopment is people want to be settled in their original estate. So, housing department, how can they satisfy these demands and yet undertake redevelopment? When they relocate from one estate to another estate, can they return to their original estate? If you can guarantee that, it might speed up redevelopment. So I hope you can come up with some ideas where old estates can be redeveloped and we can build more units on the plot. Regarding the Setley Boy interim, it was a suggestion building a new MTR station, and in the OZP they are applying for a change of land use. So could you coordinate efforts with transport department and deal with it by way of building a subway station? So you can respond to Mr. Leung's question and also supplement your previous response. Regarding redevelopment, we understand original estate owners, original estate tenants rather, they would like to relocate to a nearby estate. This is the difficulty in redevelopment or choosing estates to redevelop. If we don't have land, it doesn't mean that we don't have these opportunities in the future, because land use changes. Well, we want to do a better job regarding Setley Estate. Has land sites nearby? Oh no, we are not familiar with that right now. Has it been set aside for other bureaus, for other facilities? We would, if we have more information, we can look into it. The Setley project has already been arranged. There's a secondary school nearby that will be converted to public housing. There will be a total of 1,700 units that can lay the foundation for a good public PRH supply. And the supplement I wanted to I'll have Mr. Leung from Housing Department elaborate. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding Mr. Leung's question, first of all, in our contract we have foundation and superstructure. In the foundation, we can only subcontract once. The superstructure can only subcontract twice. So as Mr. Leung said, we want to ensure that the worker that finally gets the job has seen it been changed hands through the subcontractors numerous times. So each worker who enters a construction site, they have to they have to present an employment record. We check their remuneration records. We want to ensure their contractual salary has been delivered. And we also have employment relationship managers. If there are any questions, they can contact their employment relationship manager and follow up. So we use these means to deal with subcontracting and salary disputes.
Now, on the question of safety, as mentioned by Mr. Leung, as the Secretary just explained, we impose a number of measures to ensure safety. For example, we adopt MIC and other prefabricated construction methods. And for different job types, we need to fine-tune the arrangements. And we will continue to work with the CIC to see, in terms of training, whether workers can adopt another method for construction. Now that ends the discussion here. We thank the team from the Development Bureau, Housing Bureau, and other colleagues. I believe that members will continue to put forward their comments on housing to the government during the PA debate. Nothing under AOB. Meetings adjourned. Thank you.